Record. I think it's recording. I am not sure. Let me see. Okay, I think it is recording. Um,
It did say it was recording in progress.
okay. Yeah, on my end it didn't say that, which I was a little surprised, but if it did on your end, you guys are perfectly fine. Okay, so let's get started so that way you guys can see what we have to do. We are in week 4, so we're just about halfway done with the course. That's how quickly this goes. So hopefully everything's going all right. Make sure you're taking care of any missing assignments or you're posting your discussion board posts today so that people can respond by Sunday. So let's kind of go over the assignments that we have for this week. We have one assignment where it's the minority mathematician of historical importance, and I'm going to kind of go over that in just a little bit. You have the discussion board post, and then of course, if you are here right now, you are getting your week 4 participation because you're here, and hopefully you'll be participating in just a little bit. What we're doing, looking forward, going into the next week, we know next week we will have 3 chapter presentations, so be prepared for that. And then we'll have a discussion board post. So again, once you've done your chapter presentations, it's pretty much, easy sailing from there. You just have to make sure you participate and contribute in that manner. Remember, all of your assignments are due by the May 4th. May the 4th be with you. So just make sure you get everything in so that way I can go through on Monday or Tuesday and grade it and we can just keep going. Most of you guys are doing just fine. Keep up the good work. Just make sure you get everything in on time. As long as you do that, you'll be all set. So let's look at our first assignment that you're going to have to do this week. If you haven't already started it, this will at least give you an idea of what to expect. But the minority mathematician of historical importance. So the goal is to find someone that's been related to the mathematical field. It can be mathematics, science, physics, chemistry, anything that's mathematical in nature. And you're going to create kind of like a magazine type article. And you'll just need to do some little research. I'm not expecting you to cite sources or anything like that. But I want you to get some information about maybe a mathematician that interested you. For me, I'm going to show you mine in just a second because that mathematician was really instrumental of why I am a mathematician myself. So you want to make sure you gather as much facts as you can. Look at different websites, different sources to really get an idea of who that person is. Just make sure you're able to answer these kind of prompts. When did they live? You should know pretty much when they're born and died, unless they're really ancient. What they invented, what their most important accomplishment was, what time period in history did the person, uh, you know, let me see, which time period did they live in? How did the time and place affect their invention, discovery, what they did? What inspired them to do what they did? Obstacles they had to overcome, and how our lives have changed as a result of their accomplishment or invention. Okay, so there's a lot in there. But again, I'm not looking for like deep, deep. I'm not looking for like maybe a page or two to really go into it. I'm going to show you what I've done right now. I don't expect you to do it to this extent, but that's just up to you. So let me put this up there. Let's see. Can you guys see this? I just want to make sure. Can you guys see this on the screen?
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay. So the mathematician that I really like is Jaime Escalante. He was a inner city mathematics teacher at Garfield High School back in the 70s and 80s. He is the big person that was the main focus of the movie Stand and Deliver, which came out in 1988. But it revolves around teaching inner city kids about math. And if you know anything from the era, way back when, schools were not, they didn't have the same standards that we have now. So there was a lot of cases where kids were just going to school just to go to school for basically social reasons, but they weren't really getting anything of any importance. So Jaime Escalante, who you see here on the right-hand side, on the left-hand side is Edward James Olmos, who's played in a lot of movies. But yeah, he played Jaime Escalante in that movie. Uh, but he started to take students and try to teach them AP Calculus. AP Calculus is one of the highest courses you can take in high school. If you pass the AP exam, you can get college credit automatically without even having to start college. But for a lot of inner city East LA students thinking about college even was just difficult, much less passing higher levels of mathematics. So he started teaching AP Calc. He started working these students all the way through. And the first year that he did it, 14 students enrolled, only five took the test, and only two passed. I mean, that's not a lot, but it's a start. He was very strict on homework and attending class. He was no nonsense about it. But the students really gravitated to him because they gave him an out. Because, inner city, you need an out if you want to go higher. And getting an education was going to be that. So, one of the things that, he did was that he got people to take the APA exam. And, if you look here on the left-hand side, 1980, seven of nine students passed the exam, 14 of 15 passed in 81. And then in 1982, 18 students took the exam and 18 passed. So 100% passing rate, which is very rare when it comes to that type of test. I teach AP stats, and it's hard enough to get multiple people to pass it, much less all the students who took it all passed it. But this is where it really came to a head. And this is why the movie Stand and Deliver is very important. Uh, because he, was accused of cheating because kids made the same mistake on the tests. Multiple of them made it, and they thought they were cheating because these were mistakes that shouldn't be made. But, as a teacher, if I teach them a certain way, they're going to do things a certain way, you know? So that's not necessarily cheating, but it's just the way, especially if I've taught them for multiple years, they're used to doing things and showing me a certain way. So it's very possible that multiple students, could be accused of cheating. And so it became a really big headline back in the early 80s um, because we're talking about East LA students, Hispanic students, low income students. The fact that 18 of them took it and passed it raised a lot of eyebrows because it wasn't expected. And sure enough, they accused him of cheating. But, I believe that 12 of them chose to retake the test and all 12 passed. And so that was the big thing. It solidified what he was doing. And so that's why the film, and if you haven't watched it, go watch Stand and Deliver. I encourage it. Definitely very early 80s inner city, but it's definitely a wonderful movie. But yeah, you know, because of that publicity, people started taking more higher math classes. I believe by like 1987, 1980, he had like 75 people taking the exam. And that's something that I kind of point out right here. Only four high schools in the entire country by 1987 had more people taking and passing the AP exam than Garfield High, a place where you would not expect that to be. So that was a really big accomplishment that he had. He got people to believe that they could learn math. So you have an entire generation of students during that time who may be going to schools where they didn't emphasize math or science or technology, but he was one to start. Now, because he did such a great job, people really gravitated to what he did. And so what was important to him? And so they tried to figure out how did he inspire the students to be successful? What were his methods of teaching? Um, at the same time, good teachers know that you'll get a lot of scrutiny because people will be jealous. And so there was a lot of problems in terms of the staff, in terms of administration, and eventually it came to he left Garfield High, tried to recreate stuff at Hiram Johnson High School in Sacramento, and it didn't quite get where he wanted it to be. Still had people, the ones that took the test, passed at a 75% level, but never quite the same numbers that he had back at Garfield High. Now, he retired in 1998. He was inducted in the National Teachers Hall of Fame in 1999, lived till 2010, but his legacy continues to live on. If you see this right on the screen, this is one of the things that he had written down or talked about what one needs to teach. Okay. Uh, First, you got to know the subject. Okay. If I'm teaching math, I got to know math. So when you guys become math teachers, you got to know the math. Okay. Really important. Okay. If you don't know it, you're not going to be able to do it. Okay. Second thing is you got to motivate, what it is they need to learn. Okay. If you're not interested in it, students aren't going to be interested in it. I mean, that's just kind of, both ways. So you have to do something where it reaches to their level. Okay. I know he talks about illegal defense. If we think about, basketball, illegal defense, what can't you do? Well, then he talks about illegal defense in terms of dividing by zero, which is something you can't do in mathematics. But it gets them to think about, okay, if I see that, what does that relate to? Um, Sometimes it could be, toys, sometimes it could be manipulatives, but you have to relate to the students. And lastly, you have to respect the students. Okay. Yes, you're the adult in the classroom. Yes, you have to perform certain standards, but the kids are just as valuable. And if you want them to learn, they have to feel valuable. So it takes a while to motivate them. It's not something that's going to happen straight off the bat. But a lot of times when you're talking about teaching kids, if they feel comfortable in the classroom, they are going to perform. Okay. Because you're going to set that bar high and they're going to want to reach it. Okay. So it's really, really important that you are really making those relationships. I know some credential programs will tell you, don't smile till Christmas. I think that's a travesty. You should be joking. You should be building those relationships from day one. Have fun. If that class feels fun, they're going to want to be in there. If you were to come into my classroom in the high school, in Golden Valley High School, you'd probably see very little math on the walls because it's my personality, because I want them to know who I am outside of school. Because if they know that, then they also know that I'm a person. Because too often we've thought of teachers as being they live at the school and they probably sleep at the school and that's all they do. They don't do anything else. And they need to know, hey, there's other things that I do in my life. And it really brings out those conversations. As a minority, teacher, as a male minority teacher, it's even more important for me because sometimes I may be the only male figure that they see all day that actually talks to them. So that's why he's inspired me to I can never be on his level, but I can always try to be that best math teacher for students. And so when you're teaching all your different subjects, think about that. How can you inspire kids to and get them to reach for the stars? So this is kind of a little article that I made here. I bring some more stuff down here. The legacy, how some people talked about him, and some quotes. If you ever hear, the term ganas, from him, ganas is desire. It's important to have that. Because yes, you can get strong in terms of the math. Yes, you can get strong in terms of English and other subjects, but you got to have the desire to be successful. Okay. And I kind of put this in a format from Word. It's a template for like a newspaper. You don't have to go that far. I just chose to do that. But I found some pictures of him, pictures of with George H.W. Bush, came to visit him at Garfield High School in 1988. And that's pretty much at the peak time that he was going. Here are some of the awards or accolades that he had won and achieved as part of what he's done. And then I talk a little bit about the film. Again, if you don't get a chance to, or if you do get a chance to, please watch that. The reason why I say it, it's a really powerful film. It's not just the math, although there's math involved, but it's just really how you can relate as a teacher to a student, how you can transform lives. And transforming lives is what we get into teaching for. As much as I would love my kids to remember everything that I've taught them, they don't. But they'll remember how you treat them. They'll remember exactly how you respected them because then you never know when it's going to come back. I've got a couple teachers on my campus who were my students. So we're able to talk and everything like that. We talk about, the times they're in my class. I see students all the time in different places. They found me at Dodger Stadium, and they actually come up to me. So when you start getting that, when that time comes and your students, former students, years, and they say, hey, I remember being in your class. I had so much fun. Then you've done more than just teach them. You've hit them in a place that's really dear to their heart. So it's just something, think about a mathematician, maybe someone that you just didn't understand, but maybe it, just resonated with you, however you want to do it. But that's that first assignment. Again, you do not have to do it exactly the way I did. I chose to do it really quickly as a newspaper article format. If you just kind of do it in a little bit of, of a paper and maybe put a picture or two so we know what, we're looking at, then I think that'll work just fine. Are there any questions about this assignment? I just want to make sure. Any questions? You can put it in the chat or you can speak up. I just want to make sure that when you guys are starting to write it and starting to do stuff, you kind of have an understanding of what I will be expecting. Again, don't worry about the formatting. That's just me. I chose to do it that way. I had a little extra time and I wanted to make sure to pretty it up, I guess. Just checking the chat, making sure. Okay, it doesn't look like anybody has got it. Um, but again, just pick something. It could be a scientist, it could be a teacher, it could be whatever you feel like is important. And that's fine. Hey, Paul, that's not a problem. You chose them. That's great. Go ahead and do it. You might find some more information. I only got as quick as information as I could. So if you find more information and you want to share that in there, that is perfectly fine. Not a problem with me. Just he's from my generation, and yeah, anytime I see that movie, I watch it all the way through. If it comes on, or I've got it on, I think I got it on DVD. I show it to the kids sometimes. I even have it as a video file, so I could take it anywhere I go in case anybody wants to see it. So, yeah, but you pick what you want to do, but just make sure you get that done. Yeah, we are the same age. That's true. But yeah. Just make sure you get that done by Sunday. So pick a minority mathematician. Let's get back to here. Can everybody see this? I just want to make sure. Just checking.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so the second thing that you've got to start working on, and that is your chapter presentation. So I'm going to do a chapter here. I chose chapter 20, Concepts of Data and Statistics. What I'm going to do is kind of go through the overview of the unit, like I want you to do, talk about activities that you could do, based upon grade level. Okay, so it really comes down to grade level on that one. And then the standards, talk about assessment, and talk about what you could do with students that are doing well and students that are not doing well. Okay, so if you can do these things and then you could present it, especially for the three of you next week they've got to present, then you'll kind of have an idea of what we have to do. Okay, so chapter 20 is one I picked. Concepts of Data and Statistics. The main concepts of statistics, and that's probably because I teach it, and so it's near and dear to me. It's about formulating questions, collecting data, analyzing data, and then interpreting the results in a meaningful manner. Okay, so the idea that when we're teaching mathematics and we get to those concepts of statistics is that we're finding a way to get kids to ask questions, collect data, analyze it, and then interpret the results within context. Okay, it's not just plug and chug. It's not just get an answer, but what does the answers mean? Statistics for a lot of students is very powerful. You will deal with statistics every single day for the rest of your life in some manner, whether it be a chart, whether it be some sort of average. A lot of things happen with statistics more so than they do with the actual other mathematics. Very few of you will ever use the Pythagorean theorem at home. I'm just being perfectly honest. I've only can probably count on one hand where I've actually had to use it, and not in a mathematical sense, but in something real world related where I had to use the Pythagorean theorem, and I actually had to do some calculations. But I can tell you time and time again where we'd use data and statistics all the time, and virtually almost every single day in some manner. Okay, so it's very powerful for students. Now, statistics and general mathematics are two different things. Okay, when I say general mathematics, it's just finding answers. It's solving for X. Statistics is a different kind of mathematics, which makes it sometimes very difficult for students to understand because it's forcing them to think rather than just calculate. Uh, Statistical reasoning deals with context. Okay, so a lot of times the problems in statistics are dealing with contextual problems that are related to something that's going on either in real life or in their lives that they have to analyze. Whereas if I tell you, hey, you got to solve for X for this problem, that doesn't have any context to them. It's just a procedural. Okay, so there's a little bit more that goes into statistical reasoning. Now, statistical thinking is also based upon shape of data, how data is represented. So we talk about graphs, we talk about charts, representations, because then it tells a story. So a lot of times when I talk about statistics, it's talking about a story for students to understand and see what their thinking is and the connections in their lives to it. Now, the first part of statistics is formulating questions. Okay. Formulating questions that provide data that vary or changes are what we call valid statistical questions. If I've got a question that just gives me just one answer, that's not a statistical question. Okay. If I've got a question that if I asked it to multiple different people, it might be different, then that's a statistical question. So our first little activity that we're going to see, make sure you're participating is which of these three questions are would be considered valid statistical questions? Okay. So I want you to look at those. So I've got three questions here. How much money do I have in my wallet right now? How long can students at our school hold their breath? And do most adults, US adults, engage in vigorous exercise at least once a week? Which one of these do you think would be a valid statistical question? Put it in the chat. Missing one. So when we're looking at valid statistical questions, it's actually the second one. How long can students at our school hold their breath? Because if I ask one student how long they can hold their breath, it's going to be different possibly than other ones. How much money I have in my wallet may not change. It usually doesn't because I usually have zero because I use cards. So money in itself, that's not going to be really a valid statistical question. And do most US adults engage in vigorous exercise at least once a week? Guess what? That's a yes or no question. We can say yes, we could say no, but that's it. Unless we have more data for that, that doesn't do anything. But we could actually time people holding their breath. We could ask males and females, what's the difference between them? We can do different things with that question, but we really can't do anything with the first or third question. So that's why when I say formulating questions, it's really important to go deeper into what the students need for statistical analysis. Easy questions that have yes or no answers or just a specific answer don't change or vary, so it doesn't really help us out. And again, the more meaningful the questions, as you'll see later, the better students will appreciate what statistics is. Okay. Now, younger students with statistics are going to struggle because it's going to make them think. Okay. So don't be shocked if they're like, I don't understand. Why do we got to learn this? That's normal because they're used to doing procedural math where 2 times 5, or some sort of geometry or anything like that. But when you ask them to say, hey, here's something, what do you think? And all of a sudden they're like, that's normal. Okay. So you're going to have to train them to understand what these questions are asking. Data collection is a big part of it. You know, in order to understand statistics, you have to get data. Okay. Now, there are different ways of doing it. You can have students get data or you can provide data. Okay. Either way is perfectly legitimate. But you want it to be able to answer those questions that they're going to be dealing with. This can include surveys, experiments, and observations. Okay. I'll show you a couple of my activities that involved students getting out and actually doing either a survey or doing an experiment because it's important for them to get that hands-on experience to understand what it's like. Now, when you do data collection, you can either get things that are words or labels, like hair color. Is it brown? Is it red? Is it black? Or quantitative numbers. What is the, length of your pinky? Does everybody have the same length of a pinky? We could find that out. That's data collection that we can actually do. And in fact, part of, what we do in this world, there's so much data collection out there that those people that are able to do this can be very powerful in what they can represent. Sampling is necessary because, and we know every 10 years we do a US census. It takes a long time to perform a census. So getting everything from an entire population is almost impossible. But we can sample small portions of it. Okay. And that's what we want to talk to students. It's like, as much as we want to do everybody, we can't. So, how could we use this information to kind of extrapolate and interpret and maybe infer for the whole population? We talk about analyzing data. This is another key piece of statistics. You have to break up data into three meaningful ways. Okay, first, you have to classify it. That might include categorizing it. What type of data is it? Or it might be grouping the data into like sets. Okay, so if we're talking about, you know, height of people. We might talk about categorizing males and females. Then we might group them, teenagers, young adults, middle age, and so forth. And then you can start looking at that data in different ways. Sometimes it's really hard to look at data from everything to understand what's going on. You have to break it up into classification. Okay. The other thing to analyze data, you should encourage, and this is going to be important when we do activities with kids, graphical representation. Okay, that can include bar graphs, pie charts, stem and leaf plots, histograms, line, dot, and scatter plots. I mean, there's a lot of ways that we can do graphical representation, and a lot of ways we can do it with technology that are going to be important. And so the more that you're able to do with a graphical representation, the more you can people visually can see the story that's happening. Doesn't mean that you can tell the entire story, but it's important to understand what do the numbers say? Because a lot of times numbers are numbers, they just look like something blotched on a page, but the numbers in on a graph can tell better for us. And last thing, another way we analyze data is using measures of what we call center and variability. That's finding mean, median, and mode. You might remember that, doing math. Uh, Range and standard deviation is another way of doing things, just to see how does the data vary from one person to the other? How does it vary from the average? Are things above average, below average? Where do they fall? Standardized tests. If you ever seen, scores from a standardized test, you scored in the 79th percentile. Well, that is mean and standard deviation used to standardize how you compare to everybody else. Um, I joke that, my daughter was like in the fifth percentile in both height and weight when she was a baby. You know, that means that 95% of the people were taller and bigger than her, at that point in terms of babies. That's how we use those type of things to make comparisons. And then you look at large amounts of data, then you can make even more comparisons and predictions. And the last thing we got, in terms of statistics is interpreting results. This means taking the results, describing what's important about the data, but in context. Okay. It's not enough just to say these numbers say this, but what does it say in terms of the problem? Okay. That means making inferences about a group, class, population. These are powerful tools that kids, once they learn them, can use to help them out later on in their lives. Uh, Sample questions that you might ask when you're doing interpretation. What did the numbers tell us about the situation? What's important about it? If we got more data, how would that data look? Would it be similar or different? Is there anything we might not have considered as part of it? When I talk about in high school statistics, we talk about lurking variables, confounding variables. We're talking about things that the data can't tell us. Try to look deeper into it. And you want students to look deeper. Maybe they have some experience that they can use to help them with that. And are there any questions that did the data bring? Are there any things that like, what are our next steps? What do we want to look at next? This told us one thing. What do we need more? Okay. So part of interpreting is that analysis part where they're looking at it and then bringing it back into their lives as well as the context. Okay. So when we're talking about statistics, it's not just find the answer. There's a lot more than goes to that. Doesn't mean that we don't still do that. I want to make sure that's very clear. We still do that, but a lot of what we do in statistics, no matter what grade, is to look deeper into things, not just the answer. So the first activity that I'll present tonight, is screen time analysis. Okay. Um, we all know kids are on their cell phones. We know that, and because of that, I like to do a little project with my high schoolers, and I would do it for sixth grade as well. That's where I'm going to be focusing on, is analyzing their screen time, getting them to see what their screen time is. So I usually have students find their screen time for a week, assuming that they can have their phones at school. I tell them, hey, we're going to analyze your screen time, make sure you have your screen time, where it's where you can look at it. I try to tell them ahead of time we're going to do something like this. Um, for my students, for my high school students, we did this. I want to say it was the week after Thanksgiving. So the week after Thanksgiving, I said, "Hey, make sure you have your screen time open, so that way we could see it." And then the following week, we said, "Hey, okay, now we got to come down and figure out all the stuff, all the time that you were on your phone." Um, because it will log that. Especially iPhones will do that. I know other phones will do the same, but you have to open it up for that. And then I try to have them find the average for boys and girls. So we kind of keep a record of how much time that they have. We can find boys, we can find girls. They can then survey other students. So maybe they go to different classes and figure that out. And see if the class average is higher or lower than expected. If you're doing this with like maybe junior high kids, maybe it's an eighth grade class, and then you have them poll seventh and sixth graders and see if there's a difference in age, um, just to see if it's higher or lower, to see what's happening. And those raise questions for the students of what's going on. They can analyze their findings in a report. They could be a written report or something that you can have them do online. It could be a numerical report or a graphical report. Okay, so it doesn't have to always be writing, but I do encourage writing if you can. The standard I'd be looking at, this goes to the sixth grade standard, giving quantitative measures of center, median or mean, and variability, interquartile range or mean absolute deviation, basically standard deviation, as well as describing any overall pattern and any striking deviations from the overall pattern with reference to the context in which the data was gathered. Now, I know these standards are very wordy, okay? But basically, it's like, hey, can they analyze this and see if there's any patterns? Can they use the mean standard deviation to really identify what's going on? So let me show you some things that I already have here. So this was something that we did this year with one of my classes. Not everybody, but this is how many hours they were on, during those, days. I literally had someone on for 24 hours because they had something going on in the background and it recorded it. Um, so those are those questions when we analyze, it's like, ooh, what did we notice here? All of a sudden we had 24 hours, and it actually was a girl, and she was just like, I didn't understand why I was doing that. And it was like, but we start realizing that. You have others that are on there for 11 or 12 hours, some on there for maybe less than, a half hour, maybe an hour. So you start really being able to get to ask those questions like, okay, what do we notice? What do we wonder? What do we want to know from this data? Okay. So what I do is I have the students fill this out on a Google Sheets file that they all have access to, and they type in their numbers. They have to learn how to convert minutes to decimals. They have to divide by 60, so that way we can get as accurate as possible. And we do that as a class. So we go through it and we have them put it in. And then as a class we've built that relationship where we could be trusting with each other. And man, who's on there for 24 hours? And then they start ribbing each other a little bit, but they understand like their numbers aren't that far off either. Especially, and these are seniors, so it's not surprising that they have higher numbers. But then we start talking about, okay, what happens if we were to go talk to ninth graders? 10th graders, 12th graders, okay? Would those numbers be different? So that's where you could have them talk to different classes. Um, Definitely something you might be able to do with a little bit older students. Obviously, younger students, if they're on their phones that much, that's a little worrisome, but who knows? But it's just another activity where they can really see the power of statistical analysis in their lives. Okay, really important. Um, Now, a lot of the data can be compiled, like I said, in this left side in Google Sheets. I have them um, uh, go and get the information from other students, and then I have them convert it, and then they use it for their uh, interpretation, and then they can analyze it and then kind of, give us what's going on. And this is one thing that they've done. Oh, wait, nope. I guess I didn't have an extra piece there. I thought I did. Uh, but that's just something that could be done as an activity. It could be a culminating activity. It could be something where you want them to do a project. It's just something different, you know. That doesn't mean that any regular activities, lectures, or anything aren't powerful. During the same time, we're doing all of that. But we want to do something that connects the activity to what they're learning. Because yeah, while they're going to do the, understand how do I find mean? How do I find median? How do I find mode? Okay. Then it's like, okay, what's important to them? Okay. Why is it important? And what connection to their lives does it have? The second activity is what I call a choice board. Those of you guys that have taken me before have seen this before. Um, but a choice board is something where you give kids a choice on what they want to show you. I can't stress these type of things enough. Not everybody learns the same way. Not everybody can show their knowledge the same way. Some are more visual. Some are more, verbal. Some like to put it on paper. And so a choice board, if you've never seen it before, it's basically giving kids an activity that they can pick to show that they understand the material, show what they know. Okay. So I've got, this particular sixth grade standard, recognize that the measure of center for a numerical data set summarizes all of its values with a single number, while a measure of variation describes how its values vary with a single number. So understanding how mean, median, and mode, which are numbers, a single number, how is that different depending on the way you look at it? So you could have like, write a story. So those people that are inclined to write, that are really good writers, they may want to use that to show that they understand the concept. Do I need them to do 30 problems to show me that they understand it? No. They can do that and write. I'm not only promoting mathematics, but I'm also promoting literacy. So, hey, if they want to do that, go for it. Some of them might create what we call Flipgrid, or now I think it's called Flip, that shows how you found the mean, median, mode. So if you've got your guys that are like, they like to show off and they're very expressive verbally as well as, just being in the class, maybe they'll make a video. There's nothing wrong with that. If they can do a video, if they're willing to get in front of a camera and do that and show me and use explanations, that tells me everything I need to know. Um, you might also use a Google Slides and make a book where they teach other people how to do mean, median, mode, and they make examples. They be the teacher. And then, another one you could do is where they make a Google Forms quiz where they have people take a test. So they've got to make the test, they've got to make the answers, and if their answers are right and they've made a test, heck, once they share it with you, you might be able to use it in your own classroom. But then they feel that they have ownership of it. They know what they're doing. They have the ownership. They're showing you what they know. Doesn't always have to be a regular test. Doesn't always have to be a regular assignment. You will know what your kids are capable of and what they want to do. So again, keep that in mind. To give them opportunity for choice and agency is so, so incredibly important. But this is just one other way that you can really do that. And I'm going to talk about choice boards later on when we talk about the opportunities for remediation, and also when we talk about, enrichment for a lot of kids, because depending on where they're at. Our third one, and this is going to be one you're going to have to participate in, box plots with Pear Deck. If you have never used Pear Deck, it's a program where I can see what they're doing in real time. Okay, so we're going to talk about displaying numerical data in plots on a number line, including dot plots, histograms, box plots, which we're going to do a box plot here. So if you haven't done a box plot in forever, no worries. I'm not grading on whether or not you get it right. I'm just, trying to see where you're at. This activity specifically will allow teachers to see in real time what students know and what concepts still need some work. Okay, Pear Deck is a wonderful way so I can do formative assessment to see if my kids know it, because if there's something not right, I need to address it now. Formative assessment, again, as I described it, it's like going to the doctor for your symptoms. But a summative assessment is pretty much the autopsy. If the kid didn't know it, he's dead. He or she is dead. And going back over it, it's not like you can revive it sometimes. So you definitely want to address it before it becomes a problem, uh, than afterwards. Uh, Pear Deck, specifically, can be used as part of a lesson. I've used it where I've given a lesson and it's my notes and they're participating at the same time. You can use it as an exit ticket. You can even use it as an assessment where they get graded for it. You can do it in many different ways. There's a lot of ways that you can use it. But at the same time, it's something that where you can see their thought process. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this on the screen, and I'll need you to go here. I'm hoping you guys can see this. Can you guys see this? I just want to make sure.
Yes.
Okay. So what I want you to do is go to joinpd.com. Joinpd.com. It might ask you for a Google or something like that. Hopefully it's going to work. Can't give any guarantees. If we're all on the same system, usually it works a lot easier. Um, but that may not be the case. And then what you'll do is they'll ask you for a code, that 6-letter code, TXQKBL. You'll put that in, and then I'll know once you get in there. And that'll allow me to control things. Let me do this, and I gotta have what we call the dashboard. But I'm hoping you guys can get in. I can't give any guarantees, but I'm hoping you guys can get in. When you get in, you'll just see the main screen, and then I will move the slide so for you to be able then to access. We got one. So hopefully you're able to get in just to kind of see how you can use this. Again, depends on your students, depends on the technology you have in your classroom, depends on your familiarity with it. So the more you start learning about that stuff, the easier it gets to be. Okay, so I've got one in. Now you'll see on the screen on the lower left-hand side of that, it says one student connected. So I can tell how many I'm supposed to have and how many are connected. So I'm hoping that you're all able to get in. So then we can just do a quick activity real quick, just to kind of give you an idea of what that looks like. We got 3. Okay, I believe I've got 5 here, so I just need 2 more. So as long as I can get those 2, or we'll get started in just a second. But it's just to give you an idea what to expect. What to expect. Just gonna check, give it a second. I know sometimes getting connected, especially if you're on your phone, that's a tougher one. But it is still possible. I've had students use their phones before, especially if their Chromebooks don't work that great. I'm just waiting. Now, one of the things that, dealing with technology and especially stuff like this, some of the problems become they get disconnected or Wi-Fi doesn't work that great. You'll notice on the upper right-hand side that code is still there, TXQKBL. So that way, if kids do get disconnected, they can get reconnected really quickly, because that code will always be there. But that's there, just as a way for kids to get back in because that will happen. Don't be shocked if a kid gets disconnected. It may not be their fault. Use this. I did use this a lot during COVID, especially when we had kids, outside to just see and measure what they were doing because, it was an easy way of accessing that. Okay, so I've got 3. I'm hoping that the other 2 are able to get in, but oh, we got 4. We got 4. I just need one more. I just want to make sure. Uh, Give another minute or so, but it is definitely something that can be fun. With all technology, don't overuse it. Kids will get tired of it. Even as teachers will get tired of it. But it's just one way that you can change things up. Plus, you can see what they are knowing in real time. Okay, I'm gonna get started right here because I don't want to keep you guys forever. So I am going to, you'll notice I don't know if it did that, but we'll, you should see a screen that says five number summary and box plots activity. There we go. Okay. What I can do is I can control the next slide. And what I want you to do right now, and you can draw on this using your mouse, um, is find the five number summary based upon this. Hopefully you remember. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. But the five number summary you see that on the right hand side is the minimum, Q1 median, Q3 max. If you can't get it all, try to get what you can. Um, Again, if we were in class, we would have talked about this and I would do this activity with them just to measure who understands and who doesn't. So you should be able to start drawing on there and writing. You can even do a text box, I believe. Got one person putting stuff there. And the nice thing is, as you guys are doing this, I can see who's doing it. So if I see someone that's not participating, that's when I can walk around and I can do this on an iPad or on a Surface Pro or some sort of laptop where I can walk around and say, hey, you're not doing your work. I can have those little small conversations, either to get them back on track or figure out what's going on, because then I need to know what they know and what they don't know. Okay, so really important. You can use different colors. I've had kids do, after they get their answer, they do a whole bunch of drawings and everything like that, and that's perfectly fine by me. Um, but try to get what you can right now, because we're going to talk about that on the next slide. Now, one of the things that I can also do with this particular tool, as it's part of statistics, is that I can put a timer on there. So let's see, I can put a 3-minute timer, which means that yes, it gives kids a little anxiety because all of a sudden all the timer's there. But it's also to keep me from getting distracted and not doing things the right way. So one of the nice things about a timer is that you see it, I see it, and that keeps me where I need to be. But it also, what it does is at the end of the timer, it locks it down so that I can really measure what do the students know before I unlock it if they need to fix anything. Okay, so that's one of the nice things about using this. I'm noticing, let's see, everybody's starting to put stuff there. You know, I see someone's already got a minimum, median, max. May not remember your Q1 and Q3. I understand. Um, I didn't front load this with uh, a lesson. But so if you don't know it, you're not getting graded on that part. No worries. But the idea is it's just to get you an idea of what kids can do. Um, and it can be very powerful because if I know that maybe this part of the class isn't understanding, I can address that real quick. I can always, what nice thing is, let's see, uh, I can lock the screen right now. So I just locked it. Hopefully you might see where you can't do anything. Um, that part is if I notice that everybody's making a mistake, I can just stop it right there and say, hey, whoa, 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 whoa. We got to stop. We got to go over this. So it's a teaching tool that you can do to say, hey, I am noticing this. Okay. And then once I kind of, explain something, I can always unlock the screen again and you can go back and do things. Okay. So there's a lot of different ways that you can use this. It's not just statistics, but in this case, I'm doing it with statistics. Let's go to the next thing. So here I want, hey, that same data, make a box plot. So if you don't remember how to do that, just do the best you can. But then again, that's another thing. So if I want them to find the five number summary, I need those numbers, then I want them to make the graphical display. Again, we talk about statistics as part of me graphical displays at times. Now I've got, multiple things that I can look at. Okay. Um, but again, if you know it, you know it. If you don't know it, you don't know it right now. But that allows me as a teacher to really kind of go back there and say, okay, I can look at how many people actually know it. I can see, ooh, half the class is struggling. Okay, gotta stop there. It's better to stop there than wait for the test to figure that out. Okay, so again, that's very, very important. So I've got at least a couple people responding. And again, I am not expecting you guys uh, to do everything perfect, but I do want responses. I mean, that is a big thing. But at least try to give me something. So I'm liking what I'm seeing. People are starting to put stuff there. But it's not just drawing, it's not just putting it, but sometimes I would use this for having to show their work. If you ever had to do like whiteboards in a classroom where they might lift it up and give their answer, a lot of kids get embarrassed. They really do, especially if they get the answer wrong or they don't know. This is private, you know. This is completely private. At least on my end, it's not, but on their end, it is. So what I could do, it should show up on the screen in just a second, hopefully. Let's see if it does. A lot of times it will show there, but I gotta just check and make sure. See if it does it this way. So what I can do is I can show the student responses on the screen as they're happening. So here I've got responses. Notice here there is no name. So a kid does something wrong, their name's not shown. It's shown on my end. Okay. It is shown on my end, but it's not shown if I put it up on the screen. So if I want to say, hey, look at what this student did. Look at this. Look at this. I can highlight the ones that did it really well. I can even say, hey, look at this mistake. Not to embarrass the student, but to say, hey, these are the mistakes that I'm starting to see. Da, da, da. It can be very powerful. Now, some students, you know how students are. They will out themselves in terms of, oh, that was mine. Oh, I made that mistake. But when they're comfortable, they have no problems worrying about that. It's when they're not comfortable, you don't want to get those kids where they get that anxiety about having to do that. So this is a very powerful tool that you could use, not just for mathematics, for other parts of teaching as well. And then, I can go to this last question. So I want you guys, circle the correct answer that you feel is correct. Well, actually, it's really you answer all three. Sorry, forgive me. I didn't remember what the question is. But what's the median height? What's the range? What's the IQR? If you remember those things, you can do a text box. You can write on there. So please do that. You know, I'll give you a minute to do so. And that's a nice thing also with this particular program is that you can contour it however you want to. You can add questions, subtract questions. It all goes through Google Slides. So you can create it all through Google Slides, and then you can add the interactivity. Um, so again, it's again probably one of the most powerful tools that you could use to really hone in on formative assessment. And the reason why I say this is because that was part of one of my thesis and dissertation is talking about using technology for formative assessment. So I have a lot of experience in that. But hopefully you start seeing, oh, a student can answer, they can do it their different ways. You can see as they're answering, you know, I got someone that says, "So I'm sorry, I don't remember this part of math." I get that. No, no worries. Um, but again, that's what's great. Now you'll notice that the timer went off, your screen probably locked. Okay. That's normal. Okay. And that means that's a chance for me to, see who understands, who doesn't, and kind of go through that process. But again, it's an activity that you could do, not just with box plots, but with other things, with regards to math or any other subject that might be very valuable for you. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to end this. I'm going to end it with that name. I'm not worried about that. It might have ended for you, might have had you say, "Oh, how are you feeling today?" But just to kind of give you an idea of that activity. So when you're doing, just give you a hint, when you're doing your chapter presentations, you should have one activity that we need to do. It could be technological, or it could be something where we have to write something and then show it on our screen or something like that, or post it. But we need to be able to do one activity as part of the class. So keep that in mind. Okay. Coming back here to our activities. Um, hopefully, does everybody see this? Just want to make sure. Yay, nay?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Um, the fourth activity, which for statistics that I love doing, I'd say, is a survey experiment. Um, Having kids actually have to go out and ask questions and then gather data and then perform something is probably more powerful than them doing 30 problems on a worksheet. So, we want to, ask statistical questions. Okay, variability. You know, how old am I is not a statistical question, but how old are the students in my school? Because that could be different. Um, how much, how much do you weigh? Although we probably would never ask that in terms of a class, but or how tall are you? All those you want them to do, and then you want them to understand what is that variability. Um, so this activity allows students to understand variance of data and how it relates to their lives. You can survey other adults, students, collect data, or you can give them data. Okay. Now, as much as I would love to, always have them go out and survey, sometimes that's not feasible. But you might have them interpret data that you can give them. So keep that in mind. So it's not always that they have to go out and do it or experiment, but if you can do it, if not, give them the data so they can look at it. So here's, as part of the activity, some sample things that you could possibly do. Um, you know, do females receive less attention or slower service than male shoppers? You know, do residents come to a complete stop at stop signs? You could have them go and say, hey, at this time of day, how many people don't stop at the stop sign? Um, do they run red lights? We know that happens quite a bit. Um, what gender and age group spends more time at the Valley Plaza? You know, these are different things that they could do, depending on the age of your kids, obviously. Uh, but to really kind of understand how things vary, you know, is it, something, saw this one question, and I actually had some students ask this one time. Males are much more likely to cut their hair for either sports tickets, money, or a free trip than females. Most females would not cut their hair for any price. So they asked some questions of students. They went out and said, would you do this for this? What would it take? So they got different responses to have an idea. What would it take for them to participate in something like this? And it's good for them to understand, like, okay, where is that threshold? Obviously within reason. But it's definitely something you could do where you can give them questions to go ask, gather the data, and then look at the results. Now, assessing students. Okay, so part of the chapter, you have to assess. Okay, now there's two different ways you can assess. Formative assessments is something you should do. You don't sometimes realize when you're doing it, but it does happen quite often. The activities that you do in the classroom, a lot of times you're assessing, do they understand what they're doing? So it's, that's a formative assessment. And when I say assessment, doesn't mean it has to be graded. It just has to be something where it informs your teaching. Warm-up tasks is one thing. So you're trying to get them into math right then if you're switching from one subject to the other. So that warm-up task is going to kind of inform you, do they remember? Exit tickets when you're finished, did they learn it? And can you use that information when you have to go over it either the next day or later on? And you can do questioning like we just did with either technology, with what we call Pear Deck, or did you use non-technological means? I've had you thumbs up, thumbs down. We do fist to five, five meaning you totally understand it, fist meaning you are completely lost, just to give an idea like, okay, how are the students doing? Um, Sometimes you keep data with this, sometimes you don't, but it should give you an idea. What are you doing? And are the students learning? Now, summative assessments at the end of whatever particular chapter or unit. That would be maybe weekly quizzes where they do an actual quiz, end of unit quiz or test, or maybe a project. Um, projects are definitely a good way of seeing if they understand multiple concepts in one, especially if you have that. And speaking of projects, here's a project that would cover most of what we would do in statistics, at least for those main parts. A project-based assessment sometimes is much more powerful than just a test itself. So this is something that I've done as a project for my stats class, where they need to find the five number summary, which you guys were supposed to do, mean and standard deviation. Again, we didn't have you guys do that. Do a box plot and do a histogram of these following things. So these are things that they've learned. Now they're going to show me. Okay, that's the key. Yeah, it's not a matter of like, hey, I got you. Do you understand it? If they've learned it, they'll be able to do this. So what I've done previously before COVID was have them go, and these are my stats kids, is they would go to a car dealership. They would take prices of take pictures of the prices of the cars, the sticker prices. They'd have to find three cars, three SUVs, three trucks. Okay, so they had to do that. And then we'd compile all the information together as a group, and then we'd try to figure out what what's the best car, what's the best SUV, what's the best truck for the price, for information. They had to find miles per gallon for city and highway, the prices, and so forth. And what I would do is put them in groups where they work together, and they would, like someone had Dodge or someone had I wouldn't send them Mercedes mostly, but Nissan, Mitsubishi, places where they could get all those things. And so what we do is we compile them. Lately since COVID, since a lot of dealerships do not have large inventories, makes it a little bit tougher, but we can get the prices. And I was able to, get the prices. These are older ones, but they can compare them. Well, if I'm looking at, say, a Toyota Camry, versus a Nissan, Altima, or if I'm looking at a 4Runner versus, getting maybe a Colorado, these are things that at least my kids are going to be doing in the next 5 years. They're going to be figuring out what car they want. At least I think. So they need to start looking at what's important to them. And so what we do is, we go through this. Now, what they have to do, and this is something you can always do, they can do stuff on technology based. Again, there's nothing that says it always has to be paper and pencil. If you can teach them the technology, as long as they understand what they're getting, they'll be perfectly fine. So in this case, I have the kids actually put it on a Google Sheets file, and they have to find for all of these different things, five number summary, mean and standard deviation, box plot, histogram. They've got to find that, and they've got to create that on Google Sheets for each of those different things. So it is an intense project, but if they can do it, they know what they're doing. So here's like an example of one person's project where they had to type up all the information. They had to make sure they classified the information, which one's cars, which one's SUVs, which ones are trucks. They had to put the prices in, so that means they had to type it in. Um, I didn't type it in for them. They had to type it in. They got the sheet. They had to create a five number summary, min, Q1, median, Q3, max. They learned already previously how to put the codes into Google Sheets, like Excel, so they could do it. They had to find mean and standard deviation. They had to do a box plot and histogram. Again, all of this is technology based. So they had to go through the process and make sure that they were doing it right because they could compare it to other people because we all had the same numbers. If they did it right, and I could see the coding, because when they submit it to me, I can click on it and see specifically, like if I'm looking at the mean, I would click on that and it would tell me the code that they put in. They'd have to put in the correct code. They'd have to have all the numbers right, and they could check with each other to see if they were doing it right. And so that's a final project that shows me they understand all those concepts. They understand getting it right or wrong, and they can understand the context if I wanted them to do something writing afterwards. Okay, in your opinion, what was the best one? If you had to pick a car, what standards are you looking for? Are you looking for price? Are you looking for color? And then you start talking about, okay, these other variables that go into what makes the best car, truck, or SUV. And so it becomes more powerful than just, I found the answer. Now they're really going deeper into it. So that's definitely something you want to do. The deeper you can get with the students, Yes, it takes a little bit more effort, more time, but it's much more powerful to them. They're going to learn more and they're going to realize, hey, this is why math relates to things rather than just, oh, I'm just solving for a problem. I've just got an answer and that's it. Now they have to really think. Some will be resistant, don't get me wrong, that happens, but it's just something you could do. So when we talk lastly about extension and remediation, okay, extension activities. So we're talking about the kids who truly know what they're doing. Okay. And we have those kids in our classroom and we know that they know. Okay. So those extension activities could include, just like this, a design-based project. Maybe they design something and they have to test it out. That could be part of coding. Again, you want them to do something where they're going to tap into their natural abilities, but also their creativity. You might have them look deeper into data, maybe company data, government data, pull from different things, larger data sets. Um, Nothing wrong with that. If you got kids that are that far ahead, push them, you know, push them in a good way, of course. Um, Having students create proposals for services. So if they get data from, like, say, the government, what would be a service based upon our information that we have that we could create for our community? What are what's some things that we could use, and what would be the cost effectiveness? And they talk about, what's the average cost, all that stuff. They start looking at that. Now they're looking deeper into what's happening around them rather than just what's in front of them. Now, when we talk about remediation activities, those can include, using choice boards. That's why I said choice boards was a really powerful one, because you're going to have some students that are here. They know it. You have some students that are going to be here. Well, I need to help the students that don't know it. So if I give the ones that have a choice, let them go and be them, I can then work with the ones that don't. But they're still working on an activity. You know, you're going to have those kids that will finish the assignment. If you give them like problems, they'll finish it in 5 minutes. And you'll have some that will really struggle. What do you do with those kids that are finishing 5 minutes? Well, give them a choice where it's not going to take them 5 minutes. They got to really work at it. And as long as you do that, then that's perfectly fine. Um, Using gamification, Kahoot, Look It, those are fun activities that you could do. I did not include them in mine, but you can easily include them in yours, where, hey, make it a game. Sometimes making a game forces them to be like, and sometimes with Look It, if you've ever played that, man, it's cutthroat. Those kids want to get the points so they can steal from other people, so they need to know their material. So a lot of times doing that from time to time gets them really into it. And yeah, kids are harsh with each other. They have no fear of like being mean. And then last thing, remediation activities, or not last thing, but there's a second last thing. Having students explain the process in steps using video presentations. Um, Sometimes the kids truly do know it, but they make what is called a dumb math error, DME. Not that they don't know it. I've made those plenty of times. I remember I did, upper division statistics class. I made a mistake on a negative at the very beginning of the problem. Everything else was mathematically correct, but because the negative was there, the whole problem was wrong. But the professor saw I knew the material. I knew it. I just made an error. So sometimes maybe having the students make a video to show the steps, maybe on one problem, you'll realize they know what they're doing. It's just something procedural rather than conceptual. Okay. So those remediation activities can help the kids get that hope and efficacy that they actually know the material. Um, so just keep that in mind. And then last thing, targeted intervention, learning centers. I encourage, teachers. I mean, you might pull a group of students that you need to work with. They've been absent. Okay. So then you have other students working on something else. You have that targeted intervention. Again, you should always be looking at that. And these are broad, because when you talk about extension remediation, I mean, a lot of times you have to think depending on your grade group. Okay, so for your chapter presentation, obviously I went a lot longer. You don't have to go that long, please. You don't have to. But you should figure you're going to cover pretty much all this stuff. Okay, so make sure you're looking at the standards that you're looking at. Again, you're only focusing on maybe one grade level. Don't try to focus on a lot. because that you'll just go down a rabbit hole and you'll be there forever and you're going to be frustrated. But focus on just getting, you know, a couple activities, at least four activities. Remember, there's four activities. Talk about what the chapter is, and then what would you do for assessment? What would you do for extension or remediation? And as long as you do that, you'll have an idea of how to approach it. Okay. Are there any questions I might be able to answer? I know I've been talking a while.
No questions on my end.
Okay. Okay. Another one said none here. No questions. Just want to make sure. Hopefully, this makes things a little bit easier to understand of what I'm expecting. Again, I know this class is not going to help you teach mathematics in 8 weeks, but I can at least give you an idea of what to kind of expect, and you can get some ideas. You guys' word problems, the whole discussion and activity was awesome. I really liked it. Probably got you thinking about what kind of questions would we ask and what happens. And then when people don't understand, we get those questions that are open-ended, and your discussion on that was great. So again, that's part of the process of becoming a teacher. But if there's no other questions, just make sure you get the minority mathematician done. Make sure you turn that in. Start looking at your chapter, okay? Especially if you are next week. If you do run into any questions, ask me, send me an email, whatever it is. If we need to meet real quick on Zoom, we can do that as well before you have to present. If you are presenting next week, make sure if there's anything where you need a link put into the chat or something like that, or if you need some help with that access, let me know. I'm here to help you out, and we'll take care of it from there. Make sure you do your uh, what is it discussion board post. Make sure you answer the questions there, and make sure you respond to two other people by Sunday. And other than that, we're going to be good. So. If you have no other questions, or if you want to stay on for a little bit to ask, that's no problem. But otherwise, we are done for the evening. Hopefully, that gives you some direction for this week and going into next week. No problem, Naomi. Stop sharing.